So, welcome to the Green Room. I'm Martin Lane, the co-founder of Cannabiz. And this week, Colombia legalised the export of flower to international medicinal cannabis markets in a move described as the most significant change to the country's regulations since 2017. Now, very happily, joining me to discuss what this might mean for the Australian market is Foliumed founder and CEO, Oliver Zugel. Oliver, welcome back to the Green Room.
Very good morning to you, Martin, and thanks for having me.
And good evening to you. So I think to kick us off, what would be really helpful is, could you just explain exactly what's been announced and what it kind of means for Colombian cultivators like yourselves?
Yeah, very specifically, the industry has been working with the government over the last 18 months on an update in the legislation, which most importantly authorizes now the exportation of medical cannabis flower to international markets. This is something the initial regulation did explicitly prohibit. Fundamentally, I think for two reasons. On the one hand, the government, when it created the medical cannabis legislation 2017, wanted as much of the value add to stay in the country, and therefore the country to only export finished and pharmaceutical grade products, therefore limited all commercial exports to extracts and eliminated the possibility to do flower. And on the other hand, I think the government was rightfully concerned that the exportation of flower, if they were going into adult use markets, could potentially do further damage to the country reputation, which already, as we all know, has been suffering from the illicit drug trade. So this was something the government was quite concerned about. The industry in Colombia aligned around the topic. And over the last 18 months, we worked with the government, and they came, I think, finally to an outcome which will permit the exportation of medical cannabis flower to markets which have a medical cannabis legislation framework in place, like Australia.
Right. Okay. And yeah, neat segue really into Australia. Obviously, you know, we've had some well documented issues with flower shortage. How do you see the kind of this playing out as far as the Australian market's concerned?
Look, I think fundamentally I'd look at three different scenarios. Always pretty hard to determine which of the three will kind of play out. But the first scenario, I think in my mind, is a protectionist one, where you could call it Australian to the Australia to the Australians, and that would entail tariffs or other type of non-monetary import restrictions to be placed on product coming in from the outside, and probably with an argument that the cannabis flower should be produced locally, not be introduced here. This is something which has a precedence in the Netherlands, for example, where the state awarded a cultivation monopoly to Petrocan, but that was more than 15 years ago. The latest experiment the Swiss government is undertaking with regards to adult use THC also contemplates that the flower needs to be cultivated locally in Switzerland. So there is a scenario which I particularly don't believe is very likely, but where you would have the local industry align and achieve that importations will get prohibited or at least be made much more difficult. I think there's a second scenario, which is the completely opposite to this, where fundamentally there's like a free trade and the medical cannabis gets shipped across the borders as any other agricultural commodity, and where the Colombians would come in with the significant cost advantage they have over the Australians and fundamentally depress the flower prices in the local market. Again, I don't think that is also a very likely scenario. I think probably many people in our industry in Colombia would wish that to be the case, but I think reality always turns out to be more difficult than that. So I think ultimately you will end up with some form of a win for all scenario, where I think you will have a dozen or less of the export experienced Colombian producers like ourselves place a foothold into the markets where the flower can go in. Australia, I think, is very clearly a destination for that. And some of the local LPs who do not cultivate themselves, will therefore be able to source that flower at prices which are significantly different from what you currently have in the marketplace. It's some form of a mixed scenario where the importations are still happening, but without completely upsetting the apple cart in the local market.
So just to sort of sum up, then one potential scenario, as you say, is kind of protectionism, if you like, which would require a fair degree of kind of lobbying, I guess, from the Australian industry to government. The second scenario is Colombian producers with oversupply kind of flood the market. Is that sort of paraphrasing what you said? But then in that third scenario, as you say, that kind of mixed economy where there are local producers in Australia who need access to flower, which is at an affordable price, which will now become available from Colombia in ways that it hasn't been in the past. Which would you put your money on as the most likely outcome?
Look, as a pragmatist, I certainly believe it's going to be the third scenario, so it's some form of a compromise here. I think both of the other scenarios I put very low probabilities on. Either the industry lobbying to completely prohibit importation, I find that unlikely to materialize, in the same way as I think not everyone in Colombia is set up to export in the first place. I think there's only a dozen of companies with pharmaceutical grade anyhow. Some of them have no international presence. So I think in my mind there will be some form of a coexistence of local producers with importations, in the same way as what is emerging now in Germany, where the first German flower now has come out. There's a Tilray facility. There will continue to be imports into Germany for quite some time.
And what, from a Foliumed point of view, what's your kind of approach to the change? How do you kind of see your business kind of being impacted and changing?
Well, for us, really, until quite recently, the sale of medical flower wasn't really on the business agenda, although we started to cultivate THC landrace genetics over a year ago. Those now got all registered, so we have 10 strains of THC strains registered, which have, I think, a very interesting profile in terms of the minor cannabinoids, the terpenes, and with THC levels from 18% up, which is what we're seeing in most of the markets being a minimum requirement. So from our end, we have the cultivation ongoing until now on a R&D basis, not on a commercial basis. We have the strains registered. What will now need to happen next is, after the decree is signed by the president, which is imminent, the regulations need to be put in place. That could take any time. I think in the best case, the next 6 months till the end of the year, or a little longer. So I think we would expect that the first shipments of flower will really not go out until, let's say, early 2022.
Right, okay, so there's still a few this is a done deal though, isn't it? It's just that there's a process that has to happen in terms of it being announced, and then the kind of wheels turning in government.
Well, yes, like with every administrative process, right? You have the law being announced and signed by the president. That's imminent, and it has been agreed with the industry over the course, as I said, of 18 months, which accelerated, I think, over the last 10 days, where there were intensive negotiations and back and forth going on between the government and the industry association, which we have the pleasure to co-lead together with our peers from Clever Leaves. Right. And so what is missing now is the regulatory framework. So the details of in which type of packaging can the flower be exported. Can it be exported to a market which also has adult use at the same time? So right. It's the details, the tariff code under which it will get exported, etc. That will still need to be sorted out, but the overall framework is in place.
But generally speaking, from the point of view of availability of flower product, this is good news all round.
I would say so, yes.
Oliver, I was going to ask you what happened next, and you've already told me. So we'll wait with we'll wait and see how things pan out. But thanks for joining us and explaining what it all means.
No, thank you for having me, Martin.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.